I was always jealous because I'm like, dang, like, I wish I was there. Like, I wish I was born 20 years earlier. So like I could have, built the Google Chrome and I could have like made the kind of impact on society at that level.
Now, what do you think?
Now I feel like I have that opportunity again.
Right,
like I feel
right,
like I've been given a canvas, and like for me, I just felt like, okay, I can't pass this up. Like it doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, I was getting paid really nice at my job, but I just felt like it depends on what really matters to you. But for me, I felt like this was like another opportunity to like make that kind of impact on society, and maybe even bigger, which is crazy to imagine.
So it's a good time for founders.
I think it's a great time for founders.
Yeah.
Like if you're daring enough and you are curious enough, like I think it's an amazing time.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Go Slow to Grow Fast podcast, brought to you by Mercury. I'm your host, Heath Butler, and today I have a good friend of mine, Ayoola John, goes by AJ. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
No, I'm super excited. You guys are in for a treat. AJ is a product expert. He's going to tell you a little bit about his background, but he's also on the cutting edge of AI. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to start a startup and why AI is so hot and if it's hype or if it's real. So we're going to get into that today, and I'm super excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, it's definitely real. So we'll talk about it.
Well, look, let's jump in. Why don't we start by just sort of giving the audience a little bit about your background and your journey prior to your startup.
So I was originally born in Nigeria. I moved to the US for high school. So I went to high school in Houston, went to college in Houston. And I started my career off sort of in oil and gas, because that's what Houston's famous for. And so, I interned at all the big oil majors, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, BP. And then before I graduated, I realized I wanted to do software. I started a software, like an ed tech startup, and I knew I wanted to do that.
Wait, you started an ad tech startup? I don't think I knew that.
No, an ed tech.
Ed tech startup.
Yeah, so
okay.
I did an ed tech startup before I graduated from college. And
oh man, you holding out on me. I don't think I knew that.
I didn't really talk about it, but it was a huge lesson for me.
Before you get into what it was, what motivated you to do that?
Well, because at the time, like, if you're not familiar with Houston, like, you wouldn't really know A-Leaf, but I went to high school in A-Leaf, so it's kind of the hood, Like I said, I was an immigrant. Like, my parents didn't really go to school here, so no one really understood. Like, I didn't really understand the context of like how American society worked,
right.
And so I think for me, I felt very lucky to be able to like even go to college with a scholarship. And then when I went to college, I started getting these opportunities, to intern at all these big companies. Then, I got to intern at Goldman Sachs, which was like so random. And what I saw was I didn't see enough people that looked like me in those spaces. And I felt like there was something missing. There was this like sort of knowledge gap.
Right.
And so I started this platform, and the whole idea was to like educate like Black and Latinx, like millennials and folks on like, okay, how do you actually get these opportunities? And so the way I approached that was, just kind of raised a bunch of grants from these big companies, sponsored a bunch of students to learn through these programs and get them to like expose to South by Southwest, like just different conferences, and ultimately place them in those jobs. And so that's what like that company did.
Okay.
And the reason why I ended that company was because I realized we had organic marketing and growth and we're getting grants, but I had this vision for like the product I wanted to build. I wanted to build it like at the next LinkedIn. And I looked around me and I realized I had the wrong team for that. Okay. And so that was like my first lesson in startup is how to recruit.
Okay. Hey, that's a great lesson. That's really the linchpin to it all, right?
Yep.
A great team.
Absolutely. And that's what led me on the journey of leaving Houston, moving to Silicon Valley, joining Facebook to learn what it's like to actually build a product team and build a product at scale. I left Facebook, I joined a startup, and I went back to Coinbase, just kind of bouncing around trying to understand exactly what it took. And 6 months ago, I finally felt like I figured it out. And so I quit my job cold turkey and started working on Astronaut.
Man. So let's go back to the piece of the journey where you went to the Bay. So you felt like after the EdTech startup, you felt like, hey, I need to learn. And instead of starting another company and figuring it out, you decided to go to the start of it all and go to the Bay Area to learn? Like what was that like?
So after the EdTech startup, it was so obvious to me, like I didn't really understand what it took to build a product at that scale. I kind of just sat there and thought like, okay, if I want to build a product and I want it to have 1 billion users, where would I go? Like who knows how to do that? And like if you really think about the landscape of things, like only a few companies have ever done that, right? Like, you know, Facebook, Google, Microsoft. And I remember like, you know, I had this experience where I remember having my first Facebook account when I was in Nigeria, and I actually had my cousin go to a cafe to open a Facebook account for me because I didn't have a personal computer. And so it's like this kind of sentimental feeling. I was like, you know what? I need to go to Facebook to learn how they did that. And I broke in. Like realized it was going to be a hard sort of jump to go straight from petroleum engineering to, you know, just like building software at Facebook. And so what I did was I took some of that, like the relationships I already had in the energy space. And so I took a job at Chevron as a product manager. And I started
in the Bay.
No, in Houston.
In Houston.
So my first job was actually my first real, like, you know, like full-time job was as a product manager at Chevron.
Okay.
And I was building like these AI drilling and supply chain like product. And that was like my first time running an enterprise software team. And so I took that experience and presented that to Facebook, and that's how I got in.
Okay, so that's the hack. Go to Chevron first, and then leverage that to get over to, I guess, now Meta.
Yep.
You know, that's really cool. It's, you know, the interesting thing about that and why I wanted to explore it is because I don't think enough founders and people with ideas understand and recognize the importance of domain expertise.
Yep.
You know, as a VC, we usually are trying to back technical founders. So you either need to have deep domain expertise in the thing you're trying to solve, or you need to be able to write code. I mean, in your case, you can do both.
Yeah.
I just find that so fascinating. And I think more people would have more success if they chose to do the work to develop the domain expertise. So kudos to you, and that's super exciting that you were able to get in. And then you left Facebook, toiled around a little bit, and you ended up at Coinbase. How'd you get to Coinbase?
So I went to Facebook, and my goal was really to like learn what it took to build, you know, like a product at the scale of 1 billion people. And I was very lucky getting to Facebook. I got to work on really cool projects. So the first thing I worked on when I got there was actually like Facebook's cutting edge like crypto project at the time. It was called Project Libra. The product was called Novi. And at the time, I was working for David Marcus, who was the former CEO of PayPal. So I got to really learn from like some OGs in the space when I first got there. And so after that,
what year was this?
I want to say 2019.
Okay.
I got to really learn from the space, and then I moved on to other products. And so at some point I was leading all the creation surface for Facebook Lights, which was almost, you know, like getting close to like 1 billion users. And then also got to work on Reels and actually launched that on Facebook and Instagram. And so I think that experience sort of like, I felt like, you know, I was at the point where I would launch something, the next day 100 million people were using it. So it was like I was feeling that for the first time. Yeah. For the first time in my life, I was like, man, this is what
amazing instant gratification.
Exactly. Like this is what product market fit feels like. This is what, like, I would launch a feature on Facebook. Like I was working on the stories surface, and a lot of people don't know, but Facebook stories was like bigger than Instagram stories and Snapchat stories and whatnot. And I would launch a feature, and then it'd be like 1 billion people using it the next day. And I think for me, I just felt like, okay, I love this, but I want to go try, like I want to like try it again at a small scale. So I left Facebook and joined a early stage startup as their head of product, and it was called Faves. And Faves had been backed by Lightspeed, raised $6 million. And so joining as like sort of like number 2 at the company was like really big for me, because I got to really like put in the things I learned. And for me, it was also because I knew I wanted to eventually like work on another startup of my own. But I felt like, I guess the advantage of working at a Facebook is you learn what it's like to operate at scale. But the disadvantage is you're operating at scale. And in fact, startups don't operate at scale when they start. They operate very small and with limited resources. And so for me, I felt like I needed to like
see what that felt like.
Yeah. And so I joined a VC-backed company, and I got to do that. And that's where I really learned the real pressure of a VC-backed company.
It's not the same.
It's not the same.
I launched something. You didn't get 100 million users on your first product you launched at Faves.
No. It's like a few thousands.
Yeah. So tell me this. So Facebook, Meta, the startup, Coinbase, it seems like there's this trend you kind of went through of learning.
Yep.
What would you say is the biggest lesson, the biggest takeaway that you learned throughout that journey prior to starting Astronaut?
Yeah, one thing I have to say is a lot of people don't like understand this, but it wasn't like an accident. Like going to Facebook was not an accident. Like it wasn't like I applied to 10 jobs. No, I applied to Facebook, and leaving Facebook for the startup was a very deliberate. Like I literally just started sending them like I started writing product specs for them and like until they hired me. And then going to Coinbase was very similar. It was very, very intentional. And really what I was trying to do was I was trying to cover my bases. It was really, like, it was almost like going like this whole process took about, 4 or 5 years. It's like going back to college. But Facebook for me was like, oh, big company.
Right.
And then Faves was like, okay, small VC backed startup. And Coinbase was like medium size for me. It's like moves like a startup, but definitely like a public company.
Right.
And so for me, like, I got to learn a different range of skill sets. Like Facebook, you had unlimited resources. You had a big team. Whatever you needed was done. You didn't even like need to care about how to deploy software. You just kind of built it, and then you have the best engineers working for you. They build a thing. There's no bugs, and then there's a whole team dedicated to deploying it. Everything was just super taken care of. And then you go to a Faves where you have to worry about everything. Nothing is taken care of for you. And then you go to like a Coinbase where I still got to work really fast, but it was Coinbase. We had the brand, so where like marketing was easier. It was easier to get attention for things. And so I think the biggest lesson I learned overall though is just like the rigor. It made me realize what I was doing prior was like I was a bit naive, right? The rigor of products, like when you actually build something, like really understanding the customer, really understanding the consumer, really understanding the products you're building, and really understanding the market it's in. That's what I really learned from these places, just like that intensity.
Yeah, no, the what it takes to kind of get it done, right?
Yep.
And the level of effort and work. It's not done until it's done, and you got to see what done looks like.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
no, that's really interesting. Let's go back to something you said really quick. You said you were a bit naive.
Yeah.
I want to caution you against that word, because I made a huge mistake in my early 20s. Got ahead of my skis, and I said the same thing. I was naive, and really talented, successful guy told me, he's like, hey, no, you're not. He's like, if you go back today, if you go back to your same 23-year-old self,
right,
would you make the same decisions? And I'm like, probably. He's like, well, it's not naive, right? You just didn't know.
I didn't know what I didn't know.
You didn't know what you didn't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how our brain works around these ideas and these words, right?
Yep.
So you're being a little sympathetic with yourself, but I don't think you were naive. You just didn't know what you didn't know.
I didn't know
right?
so much.
And I think a lot of people, I wish more people would appreciate that they don't know certain things, right?
Yep.
You don't know what you don't know,
Yep.
and ask the questions, and you went to do the lessons learned. So,
Yep.
so kudos to you. So let's. I don't know how much you want to talk about your startup, right? I know it's in stealth mode, and what you
No,
want
we
to
can
put out
talk about
there.
it.
But
We can talk about
AI-based startup called
Yep.
Astronaut.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about it, whatever you want to share.
Yeah.
And what I'm most interested in are the insights, the unique insights that you have gained throughout your journey with Meta, the startup, and Coinbase
Right.
to kind of get here and launch this.
The big thing was, like when I was younger, like when I was in Nigeria, like, I kind of got interested in computers early. So I would like build these like, these forums, these online forums for like other like hackers in the country. And we would just like all get together and like have community. So like very early in my life, I knew what it was like to have like a digital community, but also in my real life, like I lived with my grandmom, like we lived on the street where like, across the street, there was like somebody selling kerosene and we sold food stuff, and like down the road, someone sold something else. And like, we always kind of all knew each other. There was this like communal like reality to our existence.
Right.
And so the story of Astronaut is really my story, in the sense that like I moved to America and I didn't really know my neighbors. Like it was this individual, like idealistic world. And on top of that, like, I started to like, use social media, Instagram and Facebook. And what I realized, if you look at like a product like Facebook, there's 3.5 billion people using the product every day, right? That's like half the planet is logging into this product every day. And the whole mission is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together.
Right.
But I look around me and I'm like, man, like this
Or
product
for some
is
people, just a voyeur. Other people.
right. But I'm like, dang, this product is successful, like by any like numerical measure. But if you like look around, like people aren't really like, you're not walking down the street like smiling at everybody and be like, hey, my brother, like we're not doing that, right? Like,
Right.
And I wish we were. And so really what I'm trying to accomplish with Astronaut is like, I want to try it a different way. Like instead of building one platform with 3.5 billion people just yelling at each other, like how about we try like going to these local communities, going to different places where other people are building small communities, maybe 1 million people, 10,000 people, 100 people, and give them tools to like help their community be more like engaged, like help them nurture their communities.
Because you're saying those communities are more deliberate, they're more intentional,
right,
and they're more focused on a particular outcome rather than randomness.
Exactly. And so like taking the level of tooling and the level of resources that a Facebook has and giving it to those small communities all around the world and like seeing how society changes. So it's like this exploration to see what it's like to build a social network, but like differently.
And then how does AI factor into this based on the trends there?
Yeah, so AI is so interesting because, like I think for me, and I could talk about specifically, but the reason why I felt like it was the right time to start working on Astronaut was because I experienced Chat-GPT. The first time I learned about GPT, I think I was at this conference in 2019 in San Francisco, and I saw the presentation about GPT-2 and I thought it was interesting, but like I didn't really, like most people, I didn't really like think too much about it. I wasn't really deep in that space. I was doing more traditional ML at Chevron at the time. And then GPT-3 came out like a year later. I kind of heard about it, I read about it, but it was kind of like, whatever. And then I think 2 years later, OpenAI rolled out Chat-GPT. And I just like, I put it on, I typed in something and it responded to me. And I was like, whoa. Like for the first time, I really got it. I was like, oh my God, there's this thing that can talk to you like a human being. Right. And like that changes everything in my mind because it's like prior to that, computers, you code and, you don't really feel like you have a relationship with the computer. But like with AI and like chat interfaces, like you actually can like talk to the computer in natural language way better than Siri, way better than Alexa. And I think for me, that's when it clicked in my head, like, oh, you can actually have like an AI like community like manager. Like you can have something that like can like get a bunch of people together and like bring people together and just relentlessly try to like give people a sense of belonging. And like I think for me that's when it really clicked for me, like, oh, it's time.
I had a similar experience. I've got a blog and I've got no time, right, as you know. And I was paying this guy like $500 a blog to like write it for me. He was doing all of the research and everything.
I see.
And I would have the idea. And similarly, I heard about 2, didn't do anything with it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then when by the time we got 3 and then ChatGPT rolls out, I had the idea in my head. I was like, let me just put this in here.
Yeah.
And bam, the like 750 word blog like pops out.
Yeah.
I took like 10 minutes to edit it. And I was like, holy.
It's absolutely incredible.
I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So needless to say, that guy's not happy with me, but just changed everything. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. So the efficiency gains, is pretty interesting. It reminds me of when Andreessen wrote the article, Software is Eating the World, right? Back in 2011. It's like, so is AI going to eat the world?
Yeah, so I think Andreessen actually ended up writing another big like paper about like how AI is basically inevitable and why we should let it happen. And it's hard for me, at least right now. Like, I mean, it's hard to imagine AI not being like one of the most consequential things like humanity ever created. Like, and that's an understatement, right? Because like now you have like something that can actually think. Like, I think for me, that was like the real eye-opening moment. It's like, you can outsource intelligence. Like, we've always seen ourselves as humans as like the wielders of intelligence. We know how to think. Like, that's what separates us from like mammals, like we're higher animals. And now
not really.
A computer can actually think in a similar fashion. And I think like when you really think about what that means, it's like computers are only going to get better. They're going to get faster. Like if you look at the rate of improvement of AI right now, from when ChatGPT launched to now we have GPT-4 and like, there's rumors of like GPT-5, you're looking at like the amount of like data and the amount of compute and how like Microsoft's of the water and Google's of the water scaling compute. Like I can't tell you when exactly we get to like a AGI or singularity, which is like an intelligence that's like smarter than humans. But like to me it's so obvious that it's inevitable. Like no one, like we're not gonna stop until we create super intelligence, right? And when that comes, then we really seriously have to contend with like who are we and like what does intelligence even mean? Like, is that even worth anything? I really think like society fundamentally changes. But the last thing is like I also think that like we're on an exponential curve. And I think people are not very good about thinking exponentials. I don't even really understand how to think about exponential functions, but that's what we're on. And so like exponential functions, they go like this. It's not like, we're used to linear functions, but
I think you're right. It may be the most consequential thing in humanity, right?
Yep.
Just because of that exponential nature of it. So where do we go from here? From your perspective, what do people do, especially founders? Like, how do you take advantage of this? In your mind?
So for me, I'm like, if you're a founder, like if you're an entrepreneur, you know, I feel like I'm of the camp where I think some people are just naturally like entrepreneurial. Like
I actually disagree with you. I don't think everybody can run a business, right? I have seen a lot of people try to run a business.
You've seen more than me. And, so like, I'm optimistic. I'm like, I think everyone could do it. But like, I think entrepreneurial spirit, I think some people just know, like some people just can't imagine. Some people just like have to do something. So one of the things I've always been like sad about, like in my life, when, you know, Andreessens and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world were building, you know, like in the last decade, like I was a child. Right. Like I was a child. I was in Nigeria. Like these people are building Google Chrome and like building, you know, everything we know and like we assume as like facts today, like the modern computer. Silicon Valley. I was always jealous because I'm like, dang, like I wish I was there. Like I wish I was born 20 years earlier, so like I could have, you know, built the Google Chrome, and I could have like made the kind of impact on society at that level.
Now what do you think?
And I think that like now I feel like I have that opportunity again.
Right.
Like I feel like I've been given a canvas, and like for me, I just felt like, okay, I can't pass this up. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, I was getting paid really nice at my job, but I just felt like, you know, it depends on what really matters to you. But for me, I felt like this was like another opportunity to like make that kind of impact on society, and maybe even bigger, which is crazy to imagine.
So it's a good time for founders.
I think it's a great time for founders. Yeah. Like if you're daring enough and you are curious enough, like I think it's an amazing time.
So now for the broader community, right? I'm in the process of, you and I chatted a little bit about, I want to build this personal assistant, right? The personal, you know, GPT sort of deal. You and I will work on that. Yeah. But, you know, it just seems like every human has the opportunity to sort of take advantage of this to make their life more productive and or make their life more enjoyable. Right? Like what's your thoughts on that?
So I wasn't like an adult when the word processor came out, but I could just imagine what it was like to have copy and paste for the first time, and what it was like to like type on a computer and like save docs, right? I can only imagine how it like must have changed the game for a lot of people, because now you can like store information and like read and write. But like, I think we're in sort of like an exponential version of that now, where you can actually have a second brain, but like a second bigger, much bigger brain, right? And so it's like, imagine having a place to store your docs, but now you have a place to store your brain. And so I think that like every human, absolutely, like if you've not tried like Chat-GPT, like you absolutely have to go try it. And I think once you experience it, then you ought to start to think like, how can I take advantage of this, right? How can I use this to like to go faster? I think I look at AI really as like a 10-lane highway, right? It's like my brain can only think in one lane, but with AI I can like expand like my capacity. And so it's almost like I can think faster, wider. Exactly. That's what AI really does. You know, it's not at the stage right now where it like can just like do everything, but like harness the right way, it can just like increase your velocity like tenfold. It's insane.
Now, so you recently did a workshop for some of our portfolio companies, you know, about building using AI to build a product and help your company become more productive. So we talk about people being more productive, but tell us a little bit about how you're using AI to help you actually write code.
So like with my startup, I mean, we're only 6 months old. We've been through like 3 versions of our product. And like, you know, we're building really deep products, you know, not just like two of us. And so
you know, the third version of the product.
Right. And so
really it's 3 of you, right? Plus your
AI, right?
Who's your COO?
So the COO is the AI. You know, we use AI extensively, and like you know, like GitHub recently launched Copilot. You know, so now it's like, you know, a lot of, if you're a software engineer and you're not using AI in some capacity, you're really missing out in the sense that like your ability to iterate like just much faster. So let me give you context. When I was at Facebook, I had this like side project where I was like building this like social media management tool, and it took me about 6 months to get my MVP out and like get to my first kind of initial users and things like that. 3 weeks ago, I had the bright idea of like, I want to make a new app that actually helps me manage like my personal life, kind of like a personal assistant for me. And I got the prototype done in like 48 hours. And I'm the same person, you know, it's just now I have better tools. And so that's the scale scale of productivity you can achieve now with AI. And I think coding is like one of the best use cases. It's like, I think AI has already found product market fit in like coding. Like, I mean, it's just really good at it. It's really good at generating code.
No, that's good. That's good. Hopefully people will try to leverage that and use Copilot at least to start.
It's a
you guys
no-brainer.
have done some custom stuff, right?
Yeah.
No, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
So digging into your experience thus far, you said the business has been around about 3 months. You wrote this LinkedIn blog post about 3 months ago when you were about 90 days into the journey. And you talked about how brutal it was, right? And so after Meta, the startup, Coinbase, and then you were still crazy enough to do it. And then 90 days later, you're like, oh, crap, this is really, really hard. Like what provoked that blog post and maybe give the audience maybe the 30-second version of it.
When I told my mom I was going to quit my job and start this company, she thought I was insane. Like, why would you do that? Like, you're already doing well, you're already making money, you're getting promoted at your jobs. And I told her, I was like, hey, I know this is going to be very hard, but I'm going to do it because I really feel the yearning to do it. So I went into this knowing it was going to be hard. And then I got into it and I was like, oh my God, this is harder than I thought.
Right.
And that's just to give you the scale of how like I sort of feel. But I think like ultimately...
But it also is because you knew what success looked like, right?
Exactly. I think for me, obviously, I think like I consider myself first like an artist, a designer. And I think like with a lot of artists, you always sort of hold yourself to the bar of your taste. And so it's like if I have this certain outcome in mind, like I sort of beat myself up until I get to the outcome. And so, I have to sort of improve.
And I know I'm cutting you off, but if you had not worked at sort of Meta and Coinbase, do you think you'd have had the same bar?
No, because I wouldn't have known what the bar looked like. I just wouldn't have known. I think experience really matters. In the same way, like people travel to different countries and different cities to experience cultures outside of their own because that gives them perspective. And now they know what great food looks like, what great fashion is because they've seen enough. And that's kind of how it is, I guess, for me with building products. It's like use great products. Like it's just like music. Like listen to good music, and then you start to form an idea of what good music sounds like. So when you do start to produce music, you always hold yourself accountable to like great music. That's how it is with startups. It's like you have to like it's helpful to like look at different startups, look at different companies, and like try to set a bar of what great looks like. So
back to the brutality of your first 90 days. Like, what was brutal?
The most brutal thing was when I realized like I thought I was a pretty disciplined person, but I realized I wasn't disciplined enough, right? Because like when you work at a big company or you work on a big team, like there's always someone there to handle something. Like there's a team that can handle the thing, right? When you start a company, you don't really have money for a team. Like, when we started, we didn't have, this is before we became a Mercury portfolio company, we didn't have anything. And so like I had to do it's just like me and my co-founder, and we had to do everything ourselves. And so like every detail, every thought, every pixel on the screen, every line of code, every design, every marketing narrative, like the logo, like I designed the logo myself, by hand. And so everything is on you. And so you really then need every productive hour in the day. It doesn't really matter. You can wake up and you're kind of tired. Like you're like, oh, I'm tired or I'm sick or whatever. And you can't really let that affect your productivity. You kind of have to still do the work because the work has to be done, and there's literally no one there to save you. Like there's no one to do it. And so that's what made it particularly brutal in the sense that like you have this high bar you're holding yourself accountable to, but it's all the work is on you, at least in the beginning, because you need to like prove the vision to the first people you even hire, and then to like investors, and then to your customers.
Yeah, you're always selling, right? That's what I try and tell people. Like,
exactly,
you are always selling your investors, your customers, your team,
even your employee, your team, right? And so, but it all starts with you. And so, like, the first thing I had to do was I had to like create the vision, and then convince my co-founder to join me on the vision, and then we had to convince investors to join us on the vision, and then we have to convince customers. And so every day is like you're selling this thing, and it doesn't really matter like what your mood is. And we're human beings. We have down days and up days and bad moods and good moods. And so like you have to keep the energy up. You got to keep selling. And I think like that's what I mean when I say it's like hard and brutal. Like you have to, like, at least for me, especially like as CEO, right? Like it's really a role of service. It's not a role of like being a commander. It's really a role of service. And so like every day I'm criticized, like every day I'm like challenged. Every day I have to like manage my emotions, manage the emotions of my team, manage rejection every single day. And I think like people underestimate like what that
the impact of
that.
No, absolutely. So speaking of which, like everything you have to do, you shared some customer videos as you've kind of gone through trying to find signal. I thought your customer discovery process and the iterations you guys have done has been one of the best I've ever seen. So tell us a little bit about like how you think about customer discovery and how that has helped you to, you talked about 3 versions of the product, slight pivot, like what's that customer discovery process like?
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I think for me, it's like there's actually this really good book called The Mom Test, and I recommend if you're going to create anything to check out that book. But the core thing, like I guess the core thing when I go into customer discovery, right? I'm trying to understand. Like the question is very simple, right? Like I mean, the whole game of startup, you know, like if you look at a big picture, it's very simple. Just build something people want, like specifically build something people need, and like ideally build something people want. And like make sure they tell you they want it, and ideally make sure to give you money and say, I want this, here's my money, build it for me, right? That's what you need to do. And then we just complicate it, right? So like that's really what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah,
like
humans complicate everything.
Right. So we might discovery process. I'm really just trying to talk to the person, like I identify in this case, you know, our product we primarily sell to community managers. And so I'm talking, I just want to reach out to community managers and say, hey, do you want this? Or like even better, what do you want? Like, what are your problems? What do you struggle with? What do you want? And have them tell you. And it's important in this discovery process that you actually like not just listen to them, but you hear them. And what I mean by that is like people have a tendency to be nice. It's a social tool to make people feel comfortable. And so when you ask somebody like, do you like my products? Like, they're likely going to say, yes, it's great. But like, they might not mean that. And it's not because they're a bad person. It's just because like, they're doing the right thing in terms of society. That's what keeps society together. It's like being nice and being cordial. You need tools to help you like dissect what are they saying, but what do they mean? Like, because they say they want this, does that mean they're going to give me money for it?
Right.
And like a lot of times it's not the case.
Right.
And so, you know, the way we do look at customer discovery is like, we really want to like observe people, understand their needs. We do, you know, we collect a lot of data on like how people use the product. When you read like books like The Lean Startup and you read, you know, there's this whole idea of the build, measure, learn loop. And like you need to take this really seriously. It's like the build, measure, learn loop is like you need to spend enough energy, like the energy you spend building the product, you need to spend the same energy measuring like the impact and the success and the use of the product, because only when you measure can you learn.
Right.
And only when you learn can you rebuild. And so I think for me, when I first learned about the build, measure, learn loop, I thought I understood it. It took me some time to really understand it. Like you really have to measure. Right? I mean, you need to spend enough energy putting in instrumentation to your product to learn how people, like what buttons are they clicking, where are they scrolling. I mean, we have tools where we literally can watch our users like in real time on video as they use the product.
Wow. No, that's really, really interesting. And then how many customer discovery interviews, interactions are you having to sort of decide on a particular feature or however you want to describe it, right? But give us some sense of volume on how you're using the build, measure, learn loop.
About 3 to 5 a day, every day. You know, just like you could like there's no way to build a product people want without asking them, without talking to them. Like the idea is like, I think one of the most humbling experiences in this journey for me, I thought I understood user research. I think Astronaut's teaching me a deeper level of user research because there's no way the good ideas are not in my head. The vision is in my head. I understand the market, but in terms of like what to actually build, there's a humility to like sort of accept where it's like, I actually don't have the ideas. You know, it's like I don't have the answers. And so the answers are really in the customer's head. And so it's like, I found it really critical to actually just like talk to them and ask them. And you would find very often they're willing to tell you because you're not asking them anything bad. You're asking them like, how can I help you? How can I solve your problem?
Right.
And like, if they see you're coming from a genuine perspective and you actually really care and you want to help them, like they're going to tell you their problems. Now it's up to you to then figure out like, do you have what it takes to solve it? So I found that to be really productive for us.
So one of the things as we sort of start to wrap up here that I really like about your process is that you are continuously focused on the problem. And I see a lot of times people get caught up in solutionizing and they decide what the solution is because they believe they know what the solution should be.
Yep.
And then they get glued to that solution. And in your case, you have this vision, but you focused on solving a problem, and your first version of the product, you didn't think solve the problem in a way that would hit the vision.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that. I thought that was fascinating as well.
Yeah. So we saw this problem with like communities, and we thought, communities were struggling to engage, like basically like community leaders, community managers, companies that were building communities were struggling to engage their communities and nurture and grow the communities. And, that's like a problem we sort of saw. It's hard. And then we had this idea of like, let's build this tool that connects members to each other and sort of like socializes them, kind of like a matchmaking tool on top of these communities. And it was very interesting. We built a really, really, really beautiful product. Like I really love the product. But once we started talking to customers and we started like giving the product to more customers, we very quickly realized that they didn't really get it. They didn't really believe it would solve their problem. And on top of that, it was really, the sales cycle was long. So when we started talking to a customer about it, because we had to explain so much about what it did and how it would help them, it took like weeks to even get the product in. But remember, the whole game of product market fit is you need to build, measure, learn, and go through that loop as quickly as possible, as fast. Like you need to go, if you can go through 1,000,000 times in one day, perfect, right? So what you're really trying to do is you're trying to go through that loop as quickly as possible, as many times as possible before you run out of money. And so if it takes 2-3 weeks to get your product into the customer's hands, that's like 3 weeks gone. You can't get back, and so you're very close to the dying as a startup.
Really fascinating in terms of what the trigger was for you there, right? Like it was taking too long to get the hands on the customer. So you really were saying this isn't it, right? Because I'm not learning fast enough.
I'm not learning fast enough, and so wow. I had to really think about like, how do you reposition a product in such a way that like they see it, they get it, they're like, I want to try it. And then you can get it really into their hands, and then they start giving you feedback from like in one day. And so that's what the latest version of our products, the reason why I'm so excited about it is because there's a lot of customers that are integrating it without even talking to me. In like minutes, they discover it, and then 5 minutes later, they've integrated. And like, for me, that's great because now I can learn much, much quicker. And then oftentimes if I talk to a customer, the same day they integrate. And so now we're collecting data much quicker. We're talking to them much quicker.
We're go to the build, measure,
we continue to build, measure, learn loop. Yeah, exactly. And so now I think this version of the product allows us to learn faster, which I think is really the key to getting closer and closer to product market fit.
No, AJ, this has been awesome, man. Look, I'll give you the last word. Any advice for young startups out there or people out there thinking about starting a company? Last words from you?
I think if you have that burning desire to create something to make a difference in the world, I think it's worth doing. I think you should just like go into it with caution, right? Like don't believe like all the hype of like, yeah, everybody should do a startup, blah, blah, blah. Like actually like seriously think about like, do I have the skills necessary to do this at the highest level? Do I have a skill set that I think I'm better than most people at? Do I have advantages, right? Like this is a game of advantages, and advantages are creatable. You just have to like figure out what you want your advantage to be and really double down on it. So I think that's like the caution. But in terms of like, is it worth it when you like put your product in front of a person and they use it and they say, thank you, this has solved my problem? I mean, that's like the best possible drug. Like, it's like someone actually telling you thank you for what you've built.
Awesome. AJ, good luck to you and Astronaut. We're expecting great things from you.
Thank you.
And looking forward to an exciting journey.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time today.
Good talking.